Hello everyone, this is NJ Arts, and this is episode 2 of my Jujutsu Kaisen manga review series, and today I'll be discussing the beginning of the story up to the fearsome womb arc. In this episode, I'll be breaking down the review with my general thoughts on the story and the art, and then give my final review and ranking. As with all of these reviews, I will mostly only talk about the manga, and I'll try to avoid going too much into the anime. I'll also only reference events that go up to season 3 of the anime, so if you're an anime only and not caught up, then possible spoilers ahead. Throughout the video, I'll show some drawings that I made relating to the chapters. If you like those drawings and want to see more, definitely subscribe to the channel and check out the links to my socials for more content. Now, on to the review. Right off the bat, I would like to say that the beginning of JJK is probably the weakest section of the story in my opinion. It's a serviceable introduction, but for anyone reading it for the first time, it kind of comes off as very generic, shonen slop. Okay, now I say shonen slop lovingly, as I still really enjoy generic shonen, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but JJK does have to do some work to stand out as more than just another average shonen manga that has that main trio fighting monsters and an inner demon with a lovable protagonist and all that. And I believe it does move away from these common tropes or puts a new spin on them completely, but for a while it really does seem like it's just setting up a story that we've already seen before. Now, Chapter 1 does a good job getting the info and introduction we need to start the story. Itadori is a fun and lovable protagonist, like most ones that we see, and it's always a little jarring for me to see just how happy and goofy things were in the beginning until, well, that thing happens. But aside from introducing Itadori and Megami, only 2 other parts of this chapter really stood out to me, that being the death of Yuji's grandpa and Sukuna's incarnation. Yuji's grandpa, Wasuke Itadori, had an interesting and surprising death in a way. His death was quick and it was sudden, and then it was just over. For Yuji, a man who's been in all of his life and his only family member, had just passed away. It's devastating. But for me as an outsider, it wasn't emotional or heartbreaking because there was really no time to even connect with who Wasuke was as a character. And that's kind of the point. It's not an important death for us as outsiders, but it is an important death for Yuji, and it's carried with him throughout the entire series as Yuji tries to find meaning with this concept of what a proper death is, while also dealing with the curse his grandfather left behind, which was to save others. The death of Wasuke also tells us that death can happen at any time, and that the world continues anyway, which is a brutal and cruel theme that plays out throughout the whole story, but I don't really believe it to be all doom and gloom either. You see, it's through these deaths that we see characters further their resolve and give meaning to their own lives and to the lives of those who had passed away. And as a narrative, I believe Jujutsu Kaisen to be a story about how other people shape the lives of those around them, and that includes how their deaths do as well. And Wasuke is just the first example of this theme, and he's definitely not the last. Moving on to Sukuna's incarnation, this moment stands out for obvious reasons, being the second catalyst to Yuji's journey, as well as the introduction to one of the key antagonists of Jujutsu Kaisen, that being my favorite, my goat, Ryomen Sukuna. Now, something you'll learn about me is that I love villains who are unapologetically evil, so evil that it almost comes off as comical, and that's kind of who Ryomen Sukuna is. I mean, the first thing he does when incarnating is demand for the women and children. Like, look at this guy, he's so excited and so happy to just start killing again. And it's the fact that he specifically asked for the women and children, like, he's trying to be as sinister as possible, all just for the love of the game, and I love it. This is the kind of villain that I really love to see, and his presence also really just hangs over the narrative, even during long stretches of chapters where we don't really see him. He's honestly what makes Jujutsu Kaisen in my opinion. Moving through this next section, we get the introduction to Gojo for the second time if you've already read Zero, and we go through the process of getting Yuji into Jujutsu Society, as well as the introduction to the final member of the trio being Nobara Kugasaki. Before we move on to Nobara's intro, I wanted to mention real quick that I actually really enjoyed this conversation Yuji has with the principal. He actually brings up some really good points and challenges Yuji's reasonings right off the bat, and it's nice development to see Yuji gain early on before everything's really actually started. He also tells us a little more about what it truly means to be a sorcerer, and overall it just makes me really sad that we don't get a lot more of Yaga in the main story. Now, onto Nobara's introduction. As is the theme with these first few chapters, it's perfectly fine. Contrary to what the memes say, Gege actually does a decent job with most of his female characters by shonen standards, and right off the bat, I think Nobara has a pretty good intro. Nobara isn't a character that I'm super invested in throughout the stories personally, and I'm not super into her technique like I am for other characters, and I was really never able to just connect with her character, but I can recognize and appreciate what her character is, and I can understand how a lot of other people could come to enjoy her throughout the series. I also like how her reasoning for taking on this super dangerous job of exercising curses was just so that she could live in the city. It's an oddly human reason, while also being a little crazy at the same time, and it really just shows the kind of mindset sorcerers need to have, even if it's in the pursuit of a seemingly more shallow goal. I also think she just rounds out the trio pretty well. Despite her negative view of Yuji and Megumi when they first meet, her and Yuji immediately get on the same wavelength, and it makes for fun interactions and a really nice dynamic when they're faced with Megumi's more chill and nonchalant attitude. With all the introductions out of the way, we move into the first major arc of the story, that being the Fearsome Womb arc. This is the arc that I believe really starts to pull you in. We get the ominous info dump foreshadowing the death of one of the three, which gives a pretty intriguing hook, and the setting does a great job of establishing the tone and mood of the arc and the events to follow. The arc begins with Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara going into the Ishu Juvenile Detention Center after a cursed womb appears and traps 5 inmates inside. And it's here that they establish that this curse has the potential to turn into a special great spirit, something the trio is definitely not capable of handling. And I really like this. We already know one of them dies, and this further ramps up the stakes and explains the danger of the mission. As they make their way inside, we're greeted to some pretty gruesome imagery. Nobara gets separated and Megumi's dog gets killed, and things have immediately escalated. I want to take a moment and discuss the pacing of JJK real quick. Gege does not waste any time when it comes to ramping up his arcs, which is sometimes to the detriment of the story, but I think it mostly works out really well and shows how brutal the world is and just how quick everything moves. The group enters the center and almost immediately things have already gone wrong, and now Yuji and Megumi are face to face with a special great spirit, the very thing they were told to stay very far away from. Before all that goes down, I also want to touch on this little argument Megumi and Yuji have about retrieving the remains of this one inmate. It's a nice internal conflict within the group, and it shows the clashing of Megumi's and Yuji's philosophies on saving everyone versus saving only those who deserve it. It gives good insight to both of their characters and sets up a lot of the dynamic and themes between the two for the rest of the series. This line, "Who's to say someone you save won't hurt someone in the future," carries so much weight throughout the rest of the series and feels like something that's always looming over their heads, especially with Yuji when it comes to his own existence, and thus the existence of Sukuna, because it is a real danger to those around him, and they both know it. Now, moving along with the rest of the arc, Yuji decides to hold off the curse alone while Megumi and Nobara make their escape, so that he can release Sukuna once they're clear of the building. And this does not really go well for Yuji, which I appreciate. It's been established that this isn't something that Yuji or even the rest of the group can handle on their own, and even with his power-up of harnessing curse energy, he's still completely helpless and completely breaks down. This does well to show that Jujutsu Kaisen plays by its own rules. Characters need more than just determination and harder work when faced with something beyond their abilities, and it stays pretty much like this for the entire series. Yuji's breakdown is also a very real and human reaction. For the first time since this all began, it sort of sets in with him that he could die, and when he's faced with his death, he's scared like most of us would be. All his confidence is shaken, and he simply states that he doesn't want to die. This is excellent character writing, and does a lot to really establish Yuji as a real believable person, and it also serves as a moment for him to grow. I know the joke of suffering builds character, but it is kind of true. Like, Yuji suffers a lot throughout this series, like a lot. And each and every time, even if there's a temporary regression, he eventually overcomes these adversities and becomes stronger for it. It's seemingly simple, but also really effective, and it builds Yuji throughout the entire series, and this is the first moment where it starts. And with that out of the way, Megumi and Nobara clear the building and give the signal, and now it's time for Hype Moma and Aura incarnate Ryomen Sukuna to make his appearance. Earlier, I mentioned how I love whenever this guy shows up, and when he does, it's always just so cool. His presence just really commands the scene, and you can feel that whenever he comes out, something's about to go down. His battle, if you call it that, against the Finger Bearer is a brutal display of his strength and really shows that there's levels to this Jujutsu stuff, going so far as to use the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery on this fodder just because. Another small moment of Sukuna flexing that I like is how he accidentally healed Yuji's other hand, as if healing is just so simple for him that it was just a reflex. His overall casual attitude with the Finger Bearer, something that made Yuji and Megumi have a full-blown panic attack over, really establishes the heights that these characters can reach and the difference between those at the top and those at the bottom. And to close out the arc, after obliterating the Finger Bearer, Sukuna has a one-on-one with Megumi after Yuji fails to switch back. And on a first read, you can only think, oh no. After that, after what we just saw happen, you can't help but be afraid for Megumi here. And even start thinking that this is it for him. Maybe he was the one at the beginning who was fated to die. And I commend Megumi for thinking he could force Sukuna into healing his heart, allowing for Yuji to take back over. But he really never stood a chance, again showing that the story does stick to its rules and plays encounters like these where someone's completely outclassed really realistically. After being backed into a corner, Megumi is ready to bring out his trump card, his go-to special, his ult. But before that, Megumi gives a monologue that's probably one of my favorites from him in the series. It gives full insight to his character and what his beliefs are and what's important to him, as well as giving some harsh truths about how the world often works. And I think his philosophy of only saving those who he deems worthy, as selfish as it is, it's really interesting and a fresh idea for one of the protagonists. And this also gets buffed up a bit by the anime, but during this scene, they use the theme Jujutsu Sorcerer Megami, and it's one of my favorite tracks in the whole series, probably in my top 10. And even when I'm reading it, I can just hear this track playing in my mind, and I get so hyped every time. All of this leads up to Yuji eventually retaking his body and dying due to the lack of his heart. But not before one last conversation with Megumi, and the two sort of reconcile before Yuji seemingly passes away. Now, we know Yuji doesn't die here, but apparently around this time, Gege was planning for a contingency in case his story got axed from the magazine, so he set this up to end Jujutsu Kaisen in case that happened. And if it was only 10 chapters long and end like this, it would have been a bittersweet but a mostly solid ending for the amount of story that he was able to write. But we know that isn't the case, and as we'll discover later, these events actually set up big points for the story later with the eventual conditions of Yuji's revival and the interest Sukuna takes in Megumi, as well as Megumi taking more initiative to become stronger himself. For this section of Jujutsu Kaisen, I can easily say that fearsome Moon arc is my favorite part of the story, with my only real criticism probably being that Obara kind of just gets sidelined throughout the whole storyline, but she'll eventually have more time to shine later, so for now, let's get into the art. As I talked about with Jujutsu Kaisen 0, I wasn't super impressed with the art then, but now, while it's still not my favorite era of JJK art, it's a big step up, and you can really feel that Gege is just a bit more confident in himself and his style. And while he's still figuring things out, he knows how he wants JJK to look and feel. Using this messy, sketchy art style, he's able to portray movement really well and also show absurd designs for these cursed spirits. And while I say that this style is messy, it's still confident. Each line is intentional and it's refined, which can be hard to pull off, but Gege manages to make it work and create something pretty unique compared to most other manga running in Shonen Jump. And as the series continues, he only continues to improve and get better. His facial expressions and overall character design is a lot more consistent even early on. In Zero, I discussed this weird uncanniness with some of his characters, and here in the main series, I can say that's pretty much gone, and eventually I have no complaints about it at all. And everyone's looking pretty solid. Something I forgot to mention in the last video was the cursed spirit design. This is early on in the story, and we have yet to see the real peak of his designs, but he does a really good job of giving these creatures a unique look and balancing the line between horrifying and kind of comedic at the same time. Most of my favorite art comes from the fearsome Moon arc though. Pages like this, where it just lets you sit with the scene and Yuji's reaction to it, tell you all you need to know without any dialogue, and this double page spread here is like a jump scare in book form. But the absolute masterpiece of this arc is without a doubt Sukuna's Domain Malevolent Shrine. This page is imposing, and a lot of it goes into the design itself of the shrine, which is just sick, and it perfectly symbolizes the power and pure evil that Sukuna has all with one single design. Also, I'm not sure if it's intentional, but I kind of like how the hand signs here look like the top of the shrine as well. Following that amazing page is another awesome double spread showing the effect of the shrine on the finger bearer. The page flows excellently and holds nothing back in showing how the spirit gets completely eviscerated. And to top it off, the next and final page of this sequence, Sukuna gives his devilishly gleeful grin when he realizes Yuji can't take over, and it conveys everything that he could be thinking perfectly. These few pages are Gege at the top of his game at this point, and it's a great sign of what's to come in the future. Also, to quickly discuss Gege's choreography, much like Zero as well, I feel as though it hasn't yet reached that level of creativity that Gege is known for, but considering how these fights aren't really super in-depth fights like that, it's perfectly serviceable for what's happening at this point in the story. That about wraps up all my thoughts on the beginning of JJK up to the fearsome Moon arc. I believe it to be a solid introduction with a very good promise for what's to come, and it's a big step up from what we had previously in the series. My final ranking is going to be a B+, and it's only going to get better from here. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment what you like most about this section of the story, as well as anything else you'd like for me to talk about, or anything else you'd just like to comment about. Subscribe as well if you don't want to miss the next video, where I will be discussing the Junpei arc, and also remember to check out my socials in the links below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.